Well, story is a process, story is a living thing. It's like a fire, and it has that kind of sentience that a big fire can have, It runs through systems, living systems, and yeah, it's something that's held collectively. So yeah, I'm not talking about there are specific stories that are this is wrong and this is a right story. My story is right and your story is wrong. It's about the process of story making, storytelling, etc. Right stories are a collective process, but they're grounded in, a foundation of place and time and land and law. And these are things that, take time and, that are passing through and around and between many people, humans and non-human relationships, grounding these things. They're profoundly sort of place-based and, they're things that can stand the test of time. Yeah, you with right story, you won't find yourself on the wrong side of history because it's grounded in the real.
Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism. This is a podcast exploring how we can best maintain a sense of energy, inspiration, and wakefulness while navigating the complexities of the modern age. My name is Brett Kane, and I'll be your host on this journey as we have a multidisciplinary conversation with a wide variety of speakers from all around the globe. This typically includes spiritual teachers, somatic therapists, artists, activists, and just about anyone else who I feel is bearing this torch well. And you know what? After 5 or so years of doing this show, I am completely aware that the scope of my interests are, broad, to put it lightly. This is a reoccurring conversation that I have with my peers and my mentors, and many of them are recommending that I tighten the aperture of topics that we cover. To that, I say no. I truly feel in my heart of hearts that in order to create a complete taxonomy of the sorts of practices and worldviews that will help us navigate these times, we're going to have to drink from many streams of inspiration. And while I always encourage going deeply with a system of practice as a main vehicle for our lives, I do think that we're going to have to stay open to different perspectives. I think a modern solution is going to be relational in nature and is going to arise from a dialogue between diverse systems of thought that are all aiming in the same direction, that is, toward human flourishing and ecological responsibility. I'm constantly validated in this approach as I get to meet so many incredible people from all around the world. If I didn't host this show in this fashion, then I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have this wildly interesting conversation with today's guest, Tyson Yunkaporta. In case you haven't heard of him, Tyson is an Australian academic, author, and Indigenous thinker. He has an incredibly unique perspective that is born from his Aboriginal heritage being combined with the rigorous education that comes from holding a doctorate degree. His work is generally focused on the intersection of Indigenous knowledge systems and how they can be applied to modern contexts. In this conversation, we explore the central topic of his book, Right Story, Wrong Story: How to Have Fearless Conversations in Hell, which outlines the function of story in Indigenous culture and how it guides us toward either integration or separation within our environment and communities. There is a lot to offer with this one. We explore storytelling as a process, how to reconnect with right story, and how to ground ourselves more fully in our local environments. Re-listening to this for the editing process was honestly almost as interesting as having the conversation in the first place, so I know that this is a good one. Before we get started on that, though, if you want to stay plugged in with Tyson's work, I highly, highly recommend his new book, Snake Talk: How the World's Ancient Serpent Stories Can Guide Us, which is now available wherever you order your books. I'd also suggest checking out the book that this conversation is based on, Right Story, Wrong Story: How to Have Fearless Conversations in Hell. Truly amazing if you're interested in this field of study. I am just dumbfounded by how much I like it. So that is what we're doing today. If you want to support this show, please head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism and consider becoming a member. Any little bit helps me keep the wheels rolling on this machine that we have created together. But I get it. Finances are a little tight for people. That is totally understandable. You're also welcome to subscribe on YouTube, like that video, leave a comment. You can follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook. If you're feeling especially generous, leaving a review over on Apple Podcasts is another way to let other people know that this show is worth their time, which I might be biased, but I think that it might be. So thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Thank you if you are returning. Thank you if you're new. I appreciate each and every one of you. Without further ado, please sit back, drink some tea, do some stretches, but most importantly, open your heart for today's guest, Tyson Yunkaporta.
Hey.
All right. Hi, Tyson.
How you going, Brad?
Welcome. Good. I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Yeah, all right. All right. Here in beautiful Bunurong country. A long way south of home, but it's a good season now. Things are moving around. The sap's moving in the bark of the trees, and wombats are out during the daytime, which is peculiar to this season. And lots of different things flowering, and things are mating. Lots of birds mating, which I know, like most people think that only happens in spring, but no, that you can't tell the turkeys and the eagles and the lyrebirds and the black swans that there's lots of black swan chicks around right now, and just loving being alive in this place. How's your place looking?
It's been a really nice summer. So I'm in Michigan, so surrounded by the Great Lakes here. Yeah. We've been kind of dealing with the Canadian wildfire smoke. So the past week or two, it's been pretty heavy to the point where going out, you smell it, you see it. It's kind of an ever-present haze, which is new. That's not something that I'm used to in my 32 years of age, So there's kind of an accommodation.
I've been up that way around the lakes.
It's an incredible bioregion.
Buffalo and Chicago and South Bend, and went all around Amish country for a bit.
Amazing!
Yarning with people, and it was interesting.
Yeah, what brought you out this way?
I was a big symposium for theologians from around the world at Notre Dame University.
Wow, amazing!
And that was interesting.
Yeah. So I think I told you this through our emails, but I am roughly about halfway through your newest book, Right Story, Wrong Story, How to Have Fearless Conversations in Hell. And I got to say, it is quite the odyssey, and it's one that I am finding compelling. It is enjoyable in some regards, and then there's something very sobering about it in others. And I don't think I've ever read or listened to somebody who has the kind of prose that you do. So I just want to start off by saying, good work. I'm finding it to be a very meaningful deep dive.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating.
It's a really niche audience, I think. And it was kind of like, it was kind of, I wrote it as kind of an intervention for the alt center in the US, basically. All those, and and where they were going, that sort of inevitable slide towards soft eugenics and Christian nationalism, and they were kind of sliding that way. It was a lot of sort of thinkers who sort of sat in that kind of what was an atheist sort of space, and was making a lot of appeals to reason, and Stoic traditions, and looking at what do we need to save from Western civilization, all that kind of stuff. But they kind of you could see them sliding. There were a lot of red flags at the time, so it was a few years back I wrote it. But I think it's landed at the right time in the US, I think, where a lot of people are waking up the morning after going, holy shit, what did we do?
Now that we're in it, it's too late to go back. It's we call it here in the Midwest, we call it the granola to alt-right pipeline. Granola is kind of That's
Yeah,
something that I heard you talk about with Raghu on, I think it's the Mind Rolling podcast. And that's really what attracted me to kind of your platform and what you're espousing is kind
yeah,
of detailing this wellness influencer turning fascist apologist. There's something
yeah,
about that is just so absurd. And I did not see it coming until it was happening, and I
yeah.
think
Well,
a big
talking
part
about
of it was,
smoke coming
yeah,
from Canada, like you, yeah, it was really sobering to suddenly see a whole heap of yoga mums, and wellness influencers sitting in drum circles with the Canadian truckers, and
yeah,
that whole,
yeah,
whole
yeah,
and, and that same week, there's, people are spray painting graffiti on billboards all over Melbourne and Australia, like, hold the line, Canada. There
yeah,
was,
yeah,
it's quite a global sort of slide towards, authoritarianism. Yeah, but, these, as you see in the book, these things have common roots. They were coming from the same place
yeah,
historically, and the
yeah.
same really bad narratives. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of leads me, I mean, the main kind of crux that I wanted to pivot this conversation on was this notion of
Mm.
story and that there is a right story and a wrong story. And, so I'd like to start this off properly by asking you what is the importance of story and how can we get it wrong and right?
Yeah.
And
Well, story is a process. Story is a living thing. It's like a fire. And it has that kind of sentience that a big fire can have. Um, yeah, it runs through systems, living systems. And yeah, it's something that's held collectively. So yeah, I'm not talking about there are specific stories that are this is wrong and this is a right story. My story is right and your story is wrong. It's about the process, process of story making, storytelling, etc. And yeah, the right stories are a collective process, but they're grounded in a foundation of place and time and land and law. And these are things that, take time and, that are passing through and around and between many people, humans and non-human relationships, grounding these things. They're profoundly sort of place-based and, they're things that can stand the test of time. Yeah, you with right story, you won't find yourself on the wrong side of history. Yeah, because it's grounded in the real. Wrong story, on the other hand, it's not grounded in the real. It's grounded in the true, and that true is like subjective. And I guess, yeah. So I guess in our Aboriginal communities, we have the true, as an individual is held in your relationships and obligations. And you're always steered back to what's real in that collective and that deep time knowledge and the insight, that comes through our inquiry every day into changes around us, etc. But that's grounded in that law, capital L-A-W.
yeah,
And that
yeah,
law, that capital L-O-R-E, that's that, those narratives, that you can follow. Yeah. Well, I guess wrong story. It just, it's usually propagated by individuals or interest groups that have a hidden agenda. There's usually an occluded agenda underneath these stories that don't say out loud because everybody would just tell them to get stuffed. But yeah, they're there and they can you can whip up a lot of passion and it can spread like a wildfire.
yeah,
And do as much damage as that.
yeah,
Stories can heal, stories can kill. Yeah.
yeah,
Right story is healing. Wrong story is always about trying to do damage somewhere, damage people or damage land.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
So you kind of,
I guess that's it. And, historically there has been some, wrong story that's, made up by some bloody spirit medium in the 18th century, or the 19th century, or Victorian England in a mansion. Helena Blavatsky was one of them, but, there were quite a few, reviving and expanding on old Atlantis myths and, trying to find this historical, advanced society, civilization that's like the homeland and the root culture of, this thing that they were creating, this idea of a white race and therefore other races, which didn't really exist before that. And I guess, and that's what the Age of Discovery was motivated by. Half of them were running around looking for, looking for this mythical homeland, promised land. And that was wrong story. That was just,
wow.
Serving other interests of power and, accumulation and all these things. Unwarranted privilege and, finding ways to create insider and outsider groups, the sort of, and bad border work, that was, there to, use violence basically to, to create powerful in-groups and boundaries where wealth can be concentrated within those boundaries, of certain families, of certain ethnicities, of certain, emerging bodies that were moving away from city-states and towards what would become nations, towards the end of the 1800s. And we sort of ended up, just, I don't know, not much more than a century ago, ending up with these nations. It was all based on wrong story and in the interests of, a few people and many millions of useful idiots.
Yeah. So is this notion of wrong story something that is kind of like married to the destiny of humans? Like, is there kind of an inevitability within our nature to kind of seek this out as individuals and kind of utilize this? Or is there something innate in that? Or I guess, how did that kind of really come about? Because it seems so antithetical to the human enterprise, because it really speeds up our annihilation.
Oh, well, it just comes from, empathy disorders. In the end, personality disorders that are, based in a deficit of empathy. And, and this has happened since, the dawn of time with humans. People will arise who are missing part of themselves. And so, our cultural explanation of that is, my family, my people call them living ghosts. And a living ghost is someone who's, gone somewhere they shouldn't have gone, or done something wrong in a place, a place of, power, spiritual significance, or they've been, cursed by somebody, or somebody's been messing around with them with sorcery or whatever, and somehow they've ended up, they've been messing around with sorcery and just bloody sold their soul, kind of thing. Sorcery's no good thing. And they lose part of their spirit, and that part is the part that that has the empathy. So they lose part of that, and it leaves a hunger in them, and so they they find themselves out of relation, with the world, with land, with community, with people, and they kind of want, like, crave that love and respect from the community they live in, but at the same time they long to destroy it as well. And so everything they do is, power moves, to control, to harm, to threaten, to coerce people, with fear. So our law is all, at the foundation of our law, is freedom. You have to have freedom of movement, you have to have freedom of affiliation, but above all, you have to have the freedom to say no. In our law, nobody can boss anybody else or force them or coerce them to do anything they don't want to do. And that's just the foundation of Indigenous law, all around the world. And basically that just means human law, because everybody until relatively recently had that. So we have cautionary tales about those things. The wrong story doesn't stay, but the right story that's warning about, people, using wrong story, through gossip, disinformation, etc., to sort of set people against each other and to set, natural systems, to imbalance those, to achieve their short-term goals, destructive goals. That's, we have cautionary tales about that go right back to the very first, men and women to walk the earth. It goes right back. And even, pre-humans with just animal spirits, animal beings, entities, all these ones, So all our dreaming stories, a lot of them don't have happy endings. They end badly because, they're all about someone doing something terrible. And, the permanent damage that does to, our living systems. So those cautionary tales are good ones.
So is there any sort of, for societies and cultures that are living within accordance of right story, is there any sort of guidance on how we can help the people who are living by wrong story kind of come back into a more direct connection with their environment and with their communities? And I'm sure it's probably different per scale, but I guess in an ideal situation when somebody would go astray, how would the community respond to that?
Well, you try to bring them back into right relation, and that and that can be, in gentle and caring, loving ways. It can involve like a temporary banishment, things like this. And when it gets really severe, it might involve some kind of violent punishment, for a person to be speared, which will give them time as they're convalescing and then having to be cared for by the community to sort of start to understand how important that care is, and potentially even, you might have to kill somebody if they're absolutely, don't respond to any of those things, that's traditionally, it's more difficult now, but I guess the most, the biggest thing is shame for us, which is different from guilt or blame or, any of these things, and it's not permanent, but shame is something that's held by you, but in relation. So, all of your family carries that shame with you, and, people involved, even maybe your victim, that shame is something that's carried collectively. So, that's a good way to steer people back into the right way. But then also, I don't know, in the last few decades, people have started to weaponize shame around wrong story, and, they'll spread gossip about somebody or, because, they want a better chance of this year's round of Aboriginal arts grant funding or something, so.
It sounded very personal.
So they'll, utilize the tools available online and the sort of, the sort of trends that are there that, that initially were there, for, right story sort of purposes, but the process was wrong, so, it's there to try and make powerful people accountable for the things they do to people that the law can't sort out, and, that did go well for a while, but then it was those weapons were, those things were easily weaponized by crappy people, and it's been completely weaponized by the right, the extreme right, which is now the right. They were weaponized by those folks, sort of gaslight people and create a post-truth landscape. So I guess the big problem, for people, and you asked before, how can they start to move towards it, I guess it's to start to understand the difference between real and true.
Mm-hmm.
So, real, that's your ontology. That's what is. That's as close as you can get to a model of what reality is, and shared stories about that. So that's something that's done collectively. Your understanding of what's real, should line up with, people who are doing that. The good work of reading signs, and, people who are embedded in the signal system, the signal systems and networks, of systems, and reading these appropriately, and, analyzing reporting, and, yarning together for consensus, to build a consensus on what's real. And that's basically how the global scientific community works. And I guess that's why, your regime is currently going after science really strongly, after every department that does, realistic statistics about, the economy and about social issues and, everything else. So, it's a very tricky thing, because then there's what's real and then there's what's true. So, if real is your ways of being, your ontology, your agreements, with the people around you about what's really happening in the world and what reality is. True is kind of like your ways of thinking. So true is how you conduct your inquiry into that reality. And so if you have motivated reasoning about that, then your epistemology is going to be out of step with your ontology. So it becomes, instead of one circle, real and true is supposed to be, mostly one circle. We're supposed to be embedded in these signal systems of, land, the universe, society, nature, all these things is supposed to be one thing. But as soon as you say, well, nature is a thing that's separate from human, then that slips. And it leaves a lot of room for wrong story to come in. Even if you have the word nature, we don't have words for that. There's just everything, so it starts to go into a Venn diagram. And I guess what we've seen over the last decade or two is a real slip there, where the epistemology is sacred, all those, the elevation of subjectivity and lived experience and personal narrative, in through postmodern sort of, research scholarship writing, culture, that was a powerful thing for a time, in kind of having voices heard that were usually not heard, and those voices from the margins, actually created a lot of rich and vibrant culture and solutions and innovations in the world, and that was great. But then, when those postmodern tools were picked up by, people with really shitty motivations, then, that caused this slip. So the real and the true became misaligned, and this increasingly large Venn diagram, which, for many people has ended up being two separate circles, I guess if you imagine that as the front wheels of your car, and so on the driver's side wheel where you're driving, that's that's the true, that's your epistemology. So that's what you think is true and how you seek truth, because you're steering through the world seeking that truth. And then, your ontology, what's real, that's the front wheel too that's turning, and then you got your axiology and methodology as the back wheels that are driving the car. So your methodology is just, so if your epistemology is what is true and your ontology is what is real, your methodology is what is useful, and then your axiology, the other back wheel, that's your what is right, that's your values. So, what is right and what is useful, that's steering you, because that's your motivation, ego, everything else pushing you through the world. Yeah, but then what's right and true, that's on the front wheels and it's steering. And if you steer, what's real and true, I mean, if you're steering from just, what your personal truth is and opinion, and that's not connected to other people and being modified, constantly, in the sharing stories, then, it's going to go wrong. You're going to finish up, enough drivers doing that, you finish up with, a lot of deaths and a lot of gridlock,
Yeah.
So that metaphor, that part of the metaphor is not even a metaphor, that's real. There's a lot of gridlock and death in the world now as a result of this kind of thing. I guess Aboriginal cultures, it's around the other way. So it's what's real and true is more stable. And that's what's actually driving and motivating, because you're checking in and you're constantly being checked by your relational obligations and your, that consensus building. But you still have your autonomy and your freedom and your personal, take on the world, and that's what's steering the car at the front. But that is values based and utility based, So you're driving from what's useful. And you're steering, but it's what's useful within the law, which is on, that other front wheel that turns with it, and they have to. You can't have a wheel alignment problem there. They gotta be in concert, So there's what's right when what's useful is steering the car in the Aboriginal world, but what's driving you is, what's true and what's real. Anyway, so that's that's kind of the difference there. And I guess with the escalation of mass communication technology, a lot of people who come from newer cultures that are steering from their own personal truth and all that sort of thing. That's often created through real motivated reasoning, and that's it's very manipulable. So powerful people with agendas can manipulate people's ideas of truth, and they can even cause people to completely dismiss what's obviously true and real in front of their eyes. Through opinion, they can just go, post-truth. And they can, even when it's proved wrong, they can say, well, it feels true. Don't ignore our feelings. Haitians are eating the cats and dogs. And it's proven wrong. And Vance just got to stand up and go, you're talking down to us now. You're disrespecting us because, with your facts, and it may not be real, but the feelings are real and our feelings are valid. And we feel like they're eating the cats and the dogs, so it's true. And all that started with the fake news sort of thing, and it kind of built from there. People can make the loudest and shittiest person can just make proclamations and keep doubling down despite everything in front of them. And that goes into, that wrong story of the art of the deal has gone through everywhere. It's in every family and it's around every kitchen table in every house on the planet. There's someone in every family. There's at least one person who, is belligerently denying reality in favor of, whatever points they can score at any moment through the day, making everyone else's life miserable.
It's interesting how he who shall not be named, his social media platform is called Truth Social. This is giving a whole different context to that.
Yeah. Well, it's neither social nor true. Yeah. But that's the way they name things, the wrong story, how they use it. We call that two-throat. People who do that are two-throat. They say one thing, but they mean another thing. So most of the think tanks in your country, you can, they're saying something, really good, like, something about fairness and justice or family or something like that, but it's actually about something that damages those things. Most of them.
So I guess I'm curious about the process that it would take in order for us to kind of connect to what is real, because right now, I mean, we're lost in the feedback loop of social media and
Yeah.
everything that people are claiming is true. And once emotions are in there, it's a runaway train at this point. It feels like, at least. And,
Yeah.
we talked about what in an ideal society would happen if somebody went astray. You can bring them back. But now the systems that we're inhabiting are now created by people who are living in wrong story, who
Yeah.
have built the systems based on their truths rather than what's real.
Yeah.
And do the teachings like that, do they scale, or are we in an unprecedented time where we have to use that to inform but create
Yeah.
something different? How does that
Well,
map
I mean,
out?
there are stories like they're good stories that people could follow, and everybody's always doing this. I mean, I guess that's your thing. You find a thinker like myself that enough people are listening to, and you can think, oh well, I'm going to amplify that voice, amplify that message, and the more people who hear that information or that opinion or that viewpoint, that will create a groundswell of people who are getting behind that message in a mass action that'll change the world. All this kind of thing. But that's not the process, of right story. So a lot of this idea of elevating the profiles and the audience size of different thinkers, to try and tip the scales, it's wrong. It's wrong story, because the answers aren't going to sit with one person or a kind of thinker. You can't expect one person to do the thinking for everybody, or even to report on the thinking of people. That's a vast collective process, which is really different. And that's difficult to do. It's almost impossible. It's really hard to do like that. But so what you got to do is get down to the foundational stuff. It's that first separation, the thing that makes wrong story possible, that separates what's true, the true from the real, so dramatically. And that Venn diagram was created with that foundational lie that humans and nature are two separate things. That there is something human that's divine or divinely inspired, or like evil even, or whatever your story is. Human beings are a virus. Human beings are the world eaters, the future eaters. Human beings are, a plague on the earth. Human beings have control of nature, dominion over nature. And it's our role to, create and build and blah, blah, blah. So that these are all the wrong stories that come out of that. But it's that original division, creating a word, nature, is something that's separate from us. So I guess foundationally, that's just, people can do that work of, aligning, their truth with their reality. And that means, having that foundational knowledge that the land is sick unless there are humans in it. The land needs us. We're part of that. When we are out of the environment, or, creating separate areas, out of what we're calling nature and wilderness, then the wilderness is just sick. That's why you get wildfires, because nobody's there looking after that place. You wouldn't have all that fuel load just all dry and itchy under the canopy there, to make the wildfires if people were in it, because we have a frickin' ecological niche, and we are a custodial species. We work right across the system. We don't have one mating season. We mate all the way around, so every species, has a mating season, usually in the land. But that doesn't, that's just the penetration part of the mating. Like we think about mating as just the insemination thing. Every species has a season for that, but that doesn't mean they aren't involved in sexual activity all through the year. So a bowerbird has its mating season. and it builds like a bower to impress the ladies and collects treasures and does all its dance and everything, and then they mate. But I mean, in this season that's just passed, the bowerbirds aren't doing that, but they're flocking together in this sort of state of sexual ecstasy, performing a dance, for the quolls who are mating, for the echidnas that then start mating after that, for the turkeys that are building their compost heaps for their eggs, and moving towards mating. It's part of it. Everything's part of it. Everything's just having sex all the time. And, everything's in this big, queer, exuberant set of like erotic assemblages all the way through, and love magic's in everything. And human beings, as the custodial species, we are just fucking all the time, alongside everything and everyone. And, everything you do is an act of love in the land. So, I don't know, the idea of connecting your sexuality not to a demographic or an arbitrary settler designation for a label of a sexuality, like, yes, you got that. That's good, but also within yourself, feel your sexuality as something that's more pansexual in the sense that it's extending out into the landscape around you. So I'd say use your sexuality there. And a great way to start that is just with the ants. Like, spend a few months just watching what the ants do. Like, every day find the ants and see what they're doing. And then see what's happening at the same time as that. And then what happens after that. With the weather, changes in the weather, look at the color of where the ants' nests are being placed and what the colors of that nest are, because the colors will be changing all the time, because they're constantly arranging and rearranging little specks of dirt and rock, to either reflect the light, reflect the heat, or hold the heat stable. So you're reflecting with white ones, holding it stable with red ones. Drawing the heat in with black rocks, and there's constantly this mosaic happen. So you start to read those patterns, and then you start to notice what's flowering at the same time, and then what the birds are doing. And I don't know, that can be boring, but if you tie that into your sexuality, that's the most powerful place where you can feel your biology responding to natural signals. So you bring yourself as a species back into your ecological niche, even if you live in a city or the suburbs, because there's plenty of life around. There's always ants. Yeah. There's lizards. There's, hawks nesting up in skyscrapers. There's always something going on. You feel it. And the flowering plants, even if they're not natives, how the seasonal changes work. And suddenly you are vibrantly and biologically connected, into what is real. Which is the land, which is sentient, which speaks, and the law is in the land. So you start to align yourself with the law, and you get a sense of what's real. And then you allow your thinking to spread out as well. So your cognition is not just neural pathways in your brain, but it's neural pathways extending out into your environment and your relations, your relationships with humans and non-humans. You feel those big patterns moving you, those dips and spikes in the financial markets as well, which are seasonal and cyclic, even in multi-year cycles. And, you feel yourself in the economy and the local economy, and you're following the velocity of this dollar and how many times it's spent locally, and, coming into relation that way. And then suddenly, you're the network of signals across all these different circles in the Venn diagram, or in a stack, if you like, if you follow Bratton's idea of the stack. It's actually happening all together in one layer rather than a stack or a big Venn diagram with lots of circles. You're starting to feel that you're participating in this signal system, and you're allowing that to move you. And, you're making decisions, but suddenly you find you're not just doing that individually, that you're doing that with other people. And then, you start to build family and neighborhood relations where you're aligned, in that way. And, that's really the only way to do it, to come home. Like I was saying with the punishments before, all those punishments traditionally, they're designed to sort of, put people in a situation where they have to come back into relation with place and people and law. They have to at least see that, and then they can make that choice, if they're going to stay or go.
Yeah. This is such a different kind of process than what's normally talked about, especially in wellness communities. And this kind of ties back into
Yeah,
the granola to alt-right pipeline, this
yeah,
idea of self-actualization and self-development. It's
mm,
so inwardly focused, and not
yeah,
many of it, relates to the things around it. It's all about what you can do to
yeah,
lift your spirits or to
yeah,
cultivate yourself. And there's so much emphasis on
mm,
the individual. And I can
yeah,
see how that is a lot more of a compromised position, which
yeah,
has led huge swaths of that community to
mm.
the fascist, apologist kind of endeavor they're on.
Well, it is a fascist. It's a foundational fascist narrative. The idea of a person, being inherently superior, or both, having a superior sort of genealogy and therefore, body and mind in the world, but also, conditioning that, with hardship and with hard work, and this idea that, people are separate. What they first started pushing, what they really leaned into with neoliberalism, starting with Thatcher and Reagan, they kicked it off, and Thatcher said, "There's no society, there's only individuals." So there's this idea of, the individual who's, striving towards becoming the Superman, Nietzsche's thing, that was kind of misinterpreted and used for some bad shit.
Most of his stuff was.
Fundamentally fascist, this idea that, you hear them using words like service, being, like making yourself fit, to serve some purpose. So you see a lot of the wellness stuff being influenced by Hindu fascism. That feeds back into the whole yoga, wellness, Ayurveda, natural medicine sort of side of things. This idea that you are optimizing yourself for some greater purpose, which is held by other extremely fit people like yourself. This idea that an economy of care is for pussies. So here's where it comes into the whole bro science and incel side of thing. That's for beta cucks, or if you're a man, or that's for losers and etc. If you're a woman, this idea that the individual optimizes themselves and they're responsible for that. And so therefore anybody who's sick, disabled, mentally ill, the extension of that is, well, that's their fault because they didn't, I told them about vitamin A, and they wouldn't listen. They took the vaccine, they gave the measles vaccine to their kids, and now they're paying the price. Yep, their gut flora is stuffed, and but then those people get chucked under the bus when they take a shitload of vitamin A, and then their liver collapses, and and then and they get, their family gets measles and spreads it to another 1,000 fucking kids, and and they end up with bloody permanent damage, and I don't know. Well, it only killed half a dozen kids in this region, so everybody else would be stronger for it.
And my downward dog is still solid.
Yeah. Right. That's the thing. That's, you can't throw everything under the bus. It's a bit like, fallacies, particularly weaponized ones. And there's a lot of them they're worth looking into because they're good red flags when you spot them. I've used them before. That's justified a lot of bad thinking, for me. And Right Story, Wrong Story was very much, a critique of my previous book that was doing those things. So fallacies are bad things. But, there's also the most important fallacy to remember is the fallacy. Just because a fallacy is used doesn't mean that the the fact that's being presented is incorrect. It can actually, it can still be correct. Don't go, yoga is Nazis, and then get rid of it. That's, it's coming from really solid traditions. And the whole, the kind of warping of the caste system over the last century or so, a couple of centuries, where, that the Brahmin caste was supposed to be people who were sort of ascetics, wasn't people who accumulated more wealth than anybody else or, was lording it over everybody else, or an ability that was, able to give orders to everybody. These were just, the people that you followed because they're, the skill set of that caste, which was more like a guild system, I think, originally. Yeah, I got a friend in Nepal who talks about it. He refused to use the word caste. He says guilds, and they all have different skill sets. Wood carvers, people who work with precious metals, people who just work on ceremony and ritual. All these kinds of things. It's not supposed to be a hierarchy or a social pyramid. And I think a lot of these traditions come out of far less abusive social structures and less hierarchical. Not that equality delivers anything particularly wonderful for everybody. It's not just about having flat systems of governance, but it's making sure everybody has access to what they need to survive and live and have a good, dignified, life where you don't have to struggle for every mouthful of food. And there's always plenty for that, and always has been. So you got good things that have come out of that proper right story and way of living, and these things get co-opted and changed, by bad story and bad actors. And I could see that happening, so much, in the pandemic. And I could see the people who were reading my first book, Sand Talk, and the parts that they were seizing on, which led me to reflect on those and even do some research about it, where I critiqued parts of that book that I could identify as using weaponized fallacies and motivated reasoning, to sort of, at the same time as I'm exhorting people to get rid of the idea of nature and, reunify humans and re-embed them in the landscape. At the same time, I was creating a false binary, as well, between, natural good, modern bad. So I was using a lot of fallacies and a lot of cherry-picked narratives and selective facts, and even like a lot of cult induction techniques like intrusive intimacy, coupled with kind of trauma bonding with the reader, like, talking about bad things that have happened to my community or my family or to me, but as a we, like an us too, kind of trauma bonding with them. And then, being very generous and kind of love bombing them, but then suddenly slap,
Wow.
Hey, colonizing bastards, look what you did, out of nowhere. It creates a dissociative state in the reader. I think a lot of people say that they've read Sand Talk, my first book, multiple times. Not many people say they read Right Story, Wrong Story multiple times. Like, in many ways, it's a better book. It's better literature. It's better thinking. But also it's not very satisfying to read. It's a hard read. Sand Talk, gives people what they want. Yeah. Helps them feel, those things. And actually, what keeps them coming back is not necessarily, good things. It's the same things that keep people, in cults, long after the guru starts raping them and their kids, they stick around, because there are things there that hold them in place. So, you've got to be really aware of these things. A lot of influencers, and particularly health influencers, do this, and they're never apolitical either. This concept of self-optimization in service of ... is there is a hidden story there. Even if the influencer is unaware of it, there is a thing called audience capture, and your audience will steer you towards the authoritarian narratives. That they are being steered towards, and even, the sentient systems, of algorithms, they will steer you towards that.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you talk about your reflections on your first book, because I actually haven't read that one. So I am mostly familiar with the sobering conversations that you're having in Right Story, Wrong Story. And there was something I wanted, because I've heard you kind of go on that thread a little bit with Raghu. And I am kind of curious about your opinion on, I'd say the last decade, maybe 15 years, there has been a pretty big kind of push toward Indigenous knowledge, especially with a lot of white people here in the United States. And I think a lot of it kind of comes from this deep-seated understanding that, like, things are not okay now. And there was a time when things might have been a little bit more stable, so we should go back. And, I guess I'm just curious to hear your perspective on kind of the commodification of Indigenous knowledge. And is that a good thing? Is it bad? Like, how do we actually meet this kind of material in a way that's respectful? Is it possible?
Well, it's Wrong Story. So, like you say, that idea going back, looking back. This is this is a fascist thing. That idea that you're always looking back to a golden age. So I think in America now it's either back in the 1700s or it's the 1950s or whatever. There's that idea of looking back to a previous age when things were better. So there is that instinct there of looking back, and that aligns so much with the sort of the woo kind of left liberatory kind of philosophies as well. There's that idea that you're looking back, to find what is natural, to find what is traditional, but also, a big postmodern desire to recover an authentic identity, an identity of authenticity, in Celtic runes or bloody something. Can I tattoo a hawk on my breast and feel more connected to the earth or to a tradition?
Remind me to not show you my hawk tattoo on my chest.
Yeah, but I mean, it's more about the story behind it, not the fact of the hawk. But so it's kind of all doing that same thing. It's that looking back, but it's also finding precedents in nature. But there was a big resurgence of interest in evolutionary psychology. Which is partially why Jordan Peterson did so well, and people are looking back into, older traditions, Western and global and Eastern as well, to try and find these narratives, to try and find these stories, these archetypes, and build something authentic from that, and of course native wisdom's always been a thing that New Agers will, they'll hang a made-up Sitting Bull quote and a picture of a brooding Indian, sitting on a horse, alone in the middle of a plain. That's the poster on the toilet door. There's that sense, but that all came too from there was a bifurcation back when they were still sort of developing the whole idea of human rights, the rights of man, all this kind of thing. Back when they were developing that, then there was that thought experiment from Rousseau, that became the kind of noble savage mythology. And then there was the backlash narrative, from Hobbes, that there was no, beautiful previous time with people. It was miserable, short lives. and nature red in tooth and claw, and it's just fight or flight responses, and we're just monkeys still, just with fight or flight responses. That's why we behave so irrationally, blah de blah de blah. But that's not actually the truth of any Indigenous tradition. And I guess there is an ancient wisdom grift, out there of people claiming to find, Indigenous knowledge or wisdom, and then, building their platform or their heuristic or their coaching philosophy or their bloody, supplement regime or something out of that. The whole paleo diet, everything else is there was this glorification of the caveman. And then there was like this branch of feminist anthropology and archaeology, for a while that was delivering powerful kind of, images of, cave women, being heaps more capable. I leaned into that a little bit in my Sand Talk, my first book as well. There's all these things, but basically if you're an Indigenous thinker, people are going to dismiss what you're saying. They're not going to hear you because they're either just be sitting there, wow, that's really wise. And then that just gets relegated to that. And it's just like, that's the fridge magnet that I have that makes me feel inspired. Or it's going to be like, well, that's just, primitive stuff that has no place here, So there's that bifurcation point. And that happened because, when they were putting together, in the Age of Reason and, the Age of Revolutions and, post-French Revolution, all that kind of thing, when they were kind of putting together, and the Age of Discovery was still rolling, an empire. So people were in dialogue, theologians and, powerful people, nobles, governors, all these people were in, and all academics, everything else, all these people were in dialogue with Indigenous people in the Southern Hemisphere and, discovering these, people who were, where freedom and nobody can boss me, where that's the central law. And, so they're having all these, deep metaphysical discussions with these people and then coming back to France and, Spain and Britain and talking these through in smoky rooms and, developing these early ideas of human rights and things like this out of that, and that's where you ended up with that bifurcation, Hobbes and Rousseau as well, and it all progressed from there. And it means we're going to be always missing each other, in the middle, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And us as thinkers, we get audience capture as well. And, everybody from elders to, Indigenous authors, Indigenous motivational speakers, we all end up getting swept away in this kind of ancient wisdom grift, unwittingly, and it's not helpful. So, where does that leave us? That's why I just keep saying, like, no, like, check out the ants, do the ants first, get the ants right, and then, get the ants right. If you can get to the point where everything you're seeing going on with the ants is leading to everything else, and that's making you feel sexy, and you're feeling that physical love going out into the environment around you, and then your thinking is going out, into systems rather than, these competitive interactions of give and take everywhere. Then things start to move for you. But that's only, that's something you do together with other people. And if you do it on your own, and you do that, then within 6 months you'll be homeless. And another 6 months you'll probably be dead. But,
I was gonna say there's going to be some citations somewhere along the line there.
That's it. So I keep telling people, don't, like, people always ask me, oh, who are you reading? Who do you think we should read? Which Indigenous voices should we amplify? Bloody blah. But I leave that up to my other colleagues who are, where that's their style of activism is to do that. you know. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of made a poor financial choice to write Story Wrong Story, because I knew I'd lose like 90% of my audience with that book, but but also that some people would read it, and I don't know, I just wanted to do the right thing. But we got a new one coming out that I made sure I co-authored this next one, so that I'm not like this singular voice in the world. And it's snake talk, so it's looking at the serpent stories from around the world and how they all kind of link up and entwine together. And we all have this pre-religion foundation of old lore and story, deep story that is pretty freaking similar all around the world. So I think I finally got it right with the third book in the trilogy.
Yeah, and somewhere down the middle.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I jumped in with your second book here. I think it's such a compelling piece of work, and I really hope that other people who are into your first book tune into it, because I think that it feels important in that sense, because it does have your voice and your perspective, but again, it is that very honest, sobering look at all of this material that I think is it's grounding in a way. I don't feel like you're giving me a bunch of candy, as much as I love candy, I feel like it's like, oh, this is actually really good for me to hear.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, I try to make it funny wherever I can. There's jokes.
It's important. It helps it go down.
Yeah.
So, we are at that time, and it kind of sounds like you just had a little bit of a plug there, but I do want to give you a space for just anything that you have coming up that people can tune into. If there's anything that you're kind of promoting beyond your books, now be the time to do it.
There is a film coming out. I co-wrote and co-directed a film called Imagine, and that's launching at Melbourne International Film Festival this week, but it'll be distributed and sort of go around everywhere. Cinemas first, and then I imagine platforms, etc. And that's that's done in a collaborative way with like a vast collective of people making a story together, and then trying to bring that together in a coherent narrative that has right story. So that's a first attempt at that. I don't know if it's any good, but I guess I'll find out. I'll find out soon.
Yeah.
It's but it is the first, the first full-length animated Aboriginal film. So
amazing! I didn't know it was animated. Wow.
So we'll see how that turns out. Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best of luck.
No worries.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Tyson, thank you so much for joining me. Truly, it's so awesome to just hear you talk about all this. It really is quite a treat for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm just really happy to be in the mix of things on Turtle Island. There, at this like real turning point, phase shift. In global history. And
we're holding our breath.
Yep. I don't know if we're just, leaving bits of reporting behind for alien archaeologists a million years from now, or if, if we're maybe, creating the conditions and good stories for, the survivors after, to pick up and regrow the world. Maybe it's a bit of both. But it's still good. It's still good work if you can get it.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right, brother Bet.
Yeah. See you.
But man, see ya.
All right, everybody, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. I truly do make this show for you in particular, those weirdos who make it all the way through. I appreciate you very much. Your time and energy is very, very respected and honored and appreciated. Again, that was Tyson Yunkaporta. You can find him by checking out some of his books for this episode. If you want to continue this exploration, Right Story, Wrong Story, How to Have Fearless Conversations in Hell is available. Also, his newest book, Snake Talk, How the World's Ancient Serpent Stories Can Guide Us, is also available. If you want to support this show, head on over to patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. Consider becoming a member. I see you. I appreciate you. I'm sending you all the loving rays that I can possibly muster. So that's going to be it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.